Former Defence Minister Christopher Pyne to reflect on how the election has gone this week. Christopher, good to see you. How are you going?
Good morning, Pete. I'm pleased to be with you.
And how would you look back on the week that was with Anthony Albanese in the basement, so to speak?
Well, I don't know whether the Labor Party headquarters will be pleased or not whether Anthony's out of isolation. They've had a reasonably good week, and Anthony has not been doing press conferences, and they've been showcasing their team. So they've had a better week than the first 2 weeks. I mean, the interesting thing about this campaign, Pete, is that the Labor Party should have been popping champagne corks a month ago, and yet they've had a 2-week lacklustre campaign. The government is having a good campaign. A month ago, Labor should have been clear air to win the election, and the government is back in it after 9 years of coalition government, with 2 difficult years because of COVID and a year of self-inflicted pain because of lack of discipline on the government side. And yet Scott Morrison is remarkably having a better campaign than Anthony Albanese. It remains to be seen how the last 3 weeks are. And I think it's fair to say, I'm being told by the people that I know in the coalition that the polling shows that the election is really line ball, and everything will come down to the last 3 weeks, and particularly the last 48 hours.
Would you say, though, that the government has had a good week? Because the inflation figures basically did Labor's job for them yesterday. It highlighted a serious problem. Cost of living is going up everywhere. Things are becoming more expensive. The government also likes to claim it's strong on national security, and you've got the issue of China and the Solomon Islands. So you've got 2 key planks that the coalition likes to think it's strong on. Are they exposed on those 2 fronts this week?
Well, it's interesting. It depends, Peter, how the government flips the issues. So, yes, they would be unhappy about a 5.1% inflation figure annualised. And obviously the Solomon Islands agreement with China is a bad development, an unhelpful development. But if the government can turn those 2 issues into making the election about economic security and national security, then they won't be unhappy. If the government allows itself to be distracted and look like they're on the defensive, then that will be to Labor's advantage. But what we've seen this week is the Prime Minister saying, yes, we are all unhappy about increasing cost of living. But does that mean it's the right time to change the government to Labor? Because most Australians' default position is that the government, the coalition is better on economic management. So if the election's about economic security and about national security, the government will be happy about that. So it just depends how they play that issue. And so far, because Anthony's been in COVID, which is obviously disappointing for everybody, and including him, and I'm glad he's well again, he hasn't been able to take advantage of that to the extent that you'd expect.
Interesting that there was an intervention of sorts from the Australian Border Force last night. They released a video, and it's going to be released in countries such as Sri Lanka, in Indonesia, Vietnam too, to basically say boats will be sent back. They'll be stopped because intelligence suggests that they might be, the people smugglers might be getting an idea to go again. What sort of doubts do you have that the boats would start again if Labor was in power?
Well, Peter, people forget how many boats were arriving before Operation Sovereign Borders. We had 50,000 unauthorised arrivals on hundreds and hundreds of boats. And the reality is that because of the government's Operation Sovereign Borders, because of temporary protection visas, offshore processing and turning back the boats, the people smugglers' business was put out of business. Now, you know, if people have become complacent about it to an extent that the boats haven't been arriving, if Labor doesn't commit to Operation Sovereign Borders, and it's had a scratchy few weeks on that issue, then of course the people smugglers will be looking to see whether they can get asylum seekers into Australia again, because that's a very lucrative business model for them.
Christina Keneally confirmed this week that all people on temporary protection visas would be moved to permanent protection visas. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, Labor wants to kill the issue of border protection because Anthony Albanese let slip in the first week that he wasn't as committed as the government has been because of comments he made many years ago about not wanting to turn back the boats and saying that he'd find it very difficult to do so. And that was his position. You know, he says that that's not his position now, but Labor is not committed to temporary protection visas. That they voted against it. You know, if the border protection issue in the next 3 weeks is inflamed by Labor, and there are people on the Labor Party backbench who don't support offshore processing or TPVs or boat turnbacks, then that will be very damaging. But not nearly as damaging as it was many years ago when, of course, there were boats arriving. So the government has, through its own success, stopped the boats and taken the issue off the agenda. It's remarkable to me, that Labor put it back on the agenda 3 weeks ago. And if the government can get it back on in the next few weeks, that'll be very bad. I mean, there's a lot of election to go yet, Peter. I mean, 3 weeks is a long time.
We're only at the halfway mark.
Only halfway. And, you know, I'll leave you with this figure. 18% of voters in the exit polls last election made up their minds in the last 48 hours.
That is a good figure. That's a good figure. A good one to leave on too, you're right.
Worth remembering.
Christopher Pyne, good to see you as always, and good to see you in Sydney. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.